I was not there to research the Bible. That's the honest part. It was a Thursday afternoon in the fall of my last year at St. Michael's, before the resignation, before any of this. I was cross-referencing dates in a secondary source on the Roman taxation system. Something about a census under Quirinius, history, not theology. The concordance was the closest large reference volume within reach. Strong's exhaustive concordance of the Bible. Red cloth cover, spine cracked, pages thick as a phone book. I pulled it without thinking. I wasn't looking for revelation. I was looking for a date. And then, almost by accident, the way you flip to the wrong page in a book and somehow find the only thing that matters. I looked up Lucifer. One entry, Isaiah 14 verse 12. King James Version only. I looked over at the Hebrew column. The Hebrew word was Hellel. Appears once in the entire Old Testament. Once. I looked it up in the Hebrew section. Strong's number H1966. It means shining one or son of the dawn. An astronomical metaphor. A word for the morning star. I closed the concordance. I opened it again. I looked up. Satan. 27 entries. I turned to the first one. Job chapter 1 verse 6. The definite article, ha Satan. Not a name, a title. The adversary. I sat in that chair for a long time. Not reading, just sitting. Knowing that something had shifted, not knowing yet what it meant. Here is what they never told you. The name Lucifer does not appear in the Hebrew Bible, not once, not in any form. The story you were given, the beautiful archangel, the pride, the war in heaven, the fall, the rebel who became the enemy of God. That story does not exist in any single passage of Scripture, not in any book, not in any verse that was written to describe those events. It was built, piece by piece, over 400 years, by theologians who needed a cosmic explanation for evil, and found it by taking 4 unrelated poems apart and reassembling them into a narrative none of their authors intended. You have never been invited to ask where the pieces came from. Today, I'm going to show you. My name is Nathan. Most of you know the background by now. 12 years teaching history at a Catholic school in Evansville, Indiana. Resigned in my early 40s when the evidence I was finding stopped matching what I was being asked to teach. What I do now is what they couldn't let me do then. Follow the text wherever it actually leads. The question I want to work through today is precise. Not does the devil exist? Not is evil real? Not a theological argument about the nature of darkness. One specific question. Where did the rebel angel narrative come from? The story of Lucifer? The name, the rebellion, the war in heaven, the fall? Where exactly is that in the Bible? If you've never been asked that question, I want you to feel the weight of it. Because I spent 12 years in Catholic education and was never asked it. Not once. Let me start with the word itself. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12. Here is the verse as it appears in the King James Bible, published 1611. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? That's the verse. The only verse in the King James Bible where the word Lucifer appears. Now look at the Hebrew original. The word Jerome, translated as Lucifer, is Halel, a compound form. Hil meaning brightness and Ben Shachar meaning son of the dawn. Shining one, son of the dawn. An astronomical image, the morning star, what we would call Venus when it appears before sunrise. Jerome was not inventing anything in his translation. He reached for the Latin noun that meant morning star, Lucifer, from lux, light, and fere, to carry, light bearer. The same word Roman poets used for the planet Venus. Virgil used it. Ovid used it. It was ordinary Latin, not supernatural Latin. Jerome used the word the same way you would say the dawn star in English. A noun. A common noun. The King James translators, working 1200 years after Jerome, retained his Latin as if it were a proper name. They capitalized it, and Lucifer, the Latin noun, became Lucifer the being. That translation choice, that single capitalization in 1611, became the foundation for 1500 years of Christian demonology. Modern scholars have recognized the problem. The New International Version renders the verse, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. The English Standard Version, day star, son of dawn. The New Revised Standard Version, day star, son of dawn. Every major modern translation goes back to what the Hebrew actually says. A morning star. An astronomical metaphor, not a name. And Isaiah chapter 14 verse 4, 2 verses earlier, explicitly addresses who this poem is about. Take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon. The poem is a political taunt, a piece of ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric celebrating the fall of an enemy ruler. Not a cosmic narrative about a pre-creation rebellion. The church knew this. It has always known this. The text says King of Babylon in plain language 8 verses before the line it built a theology on. Now here is the part that took me longer to fully absorb, because the Isaiah passage is one error, or one choice. What happened next required assembling 3 more. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 through 17. This is a lament over the king of Tyre. Not Babylon, Tyre. A different king, a different city, a different century. But the language is extraordinary. You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. You were an anointed cherub who covers. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until iniquity was found in you. Read that carefully. An anointed cherub. Perfect at creation. Iniquity found in him. The patristic theologians, the men who built Christian doctrine in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, looked at Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and saw the same figure. A being of primordial beauty. Pride or iniquity entering that beauty. A fall. They were wrong. The king of Babylon and the king of Tyre are not the same person. Isaiah and Ezekiel are not writing about the same event. Neither text is describing a pre-cosmic angelic rebellion. Both are ancient Near Eastern lament poetry, a specific literary form, addressed to human rulers through the language of mythological grandeur. It was a common rhetorical device, the way we might use hyperbole to describe a fallen president. The theologians were Greek-speaking scholars applying Hellenistic cosmology, a universe organized around cosmic conflict between higher and lower beings, onto Semitic poetry that was doing something entirely different. And they didn't stop there. Because there were still 2 more pieces to find. Now I need to take you to the book of Job, because here is where the story gets structurally strange. Job, chapter 1, verse 6. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Satan, the definite article. In Hebrew, the definite article is not used with proper names. You don't say the Nathan, you say the adversary, the accuser, the prosecutor. Satan is a job title, a function within a structure. And look at what that structure is. The Bene Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, the divine council, are presenting themselves before YHWH. This is an assembly, a hierarchy, a court, and Satan walks in with the rest of them, not sneaking, not invading, not presenting himself as an enemy. He has a standing invitation to this meeting. The Lord says to him, "Where have you come from?" Satan answers, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." He has been patrolling, reporting, doing his job. Then YHWH says, and I want you to feel the weight of this. The Lord said to the Satan, "Very well, all that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." That's Job chapter 1 verse 12. New Revised Standard Version. God gives explicit permission within defined limits. Satan operates within God's authorization structure. This is not a rebel. This is not a fallen being. This is a cosmic prosecuting attorney who reports to the court, receives assignments from the court, and operates within the boundaries the court establishes. The word Satan appears 27 times in 23 verses across the Old Testament. In virtually every instance, including all of Job, it carries the definite article, the adversary, the accuser, a role, the personal name Satan stripped of the article, referring to a fallen angel with a biography and a rebellion that is not in the Hebrew text. That is a later construction, imported into the Hebrew Bible through translations and theological frameworks built centuries after the texts were composed. You've been protecting yourself from a rebel who has a standing weekly meeting with God. Think about what that means. The prayers, the rituals, the spiritual battle language, the cosmic war framework. All of it built on a being who, in the text's own account, walks into the divine assembly with an invitation, reports his movements to YHWH, and asks permission before doing anything. The rebel who defied God is not in the Hebrew Bible, not in Job, not in Isaiah 14, not in the Psalms. He entered Christianity in the 3rd century, built by one man. There is a passage in the Bible so precise, so documented, so unmistakable, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. 2 books, same event, different agent. 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 1, written approximately 950 BCE. Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, "Go, number Israel and Judah." God incites the census. David carries it out. God punishes Israel with a plague that kills 70,000 people. God ordered it. God punished David for obeying. This is morally awkward. The ancient Israelite author apparently recognized the problem because he wrote it down anyway and left the tension unresolved. Now open 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 1. Written approximately 400 BCE, 550 years later, Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel. Same census, same outcome, 70,000 dead. But the agent has changed. Where the earlier text says God incited the census, the later text says Satan did. Not interpretation, not translation dispute. The same event, rewritten. The word God replaced by the word Satan. The chronicler was working during or after the Babylonian exile, a period of intense contact with Persian Zoroastrian theology, a cosmology built around 2 equal and opposing divine forces, one of light and one of darkness. Scholars including John Day at Oxford and Michael Heiser at Logos Bible Software have documented this in detail. The shift in how the Hebrew Bible treats the adversary figure, from divine council member to opposing force, tracks precisely with the period of Persian influence on Israelite theology. This is not suppressed scholarship. It is not hidden. The 2 verses sit in the same Bible openly. 1 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. Anyone with a concordance and an afternoon can find them. I know because I was that person. In a library in Evansville, on a Thursday. With a concordance, I didn't go there to read. His name was Origen of Alexandria. Origen was born around 185 CE. He was one of the most brilliant theologians the early church produced. He read Greek fluently. He read Hebrew. He had access to more manuscripts than almost anyone of his era. At around 230 CE, in his systematic work, De Principiis, on first principles, he did something no one had done before. He took Isaiah 14, verse 12. He took Ezekiel 28, verses 12 through 17. He read them together. He concluded, these 2 passages describe a single event, a pre-cosmic fall, a being of primordial beauty who became proud and was expelled from heaven. Origen was the first theologian to systematically apply Isaiah 14 to Satan. Before Origen, the passage was read as Isaiah's own text declared it, a taunt against Babylon. After Origen, it became the biography of the devil. 200 years later, Augustine of Hippo completed the construction. City of God, books 11 and 14, written between 413 and 426 CE. Augustine added the philosophical framework, the fall through superbia, Latin for pride, the pre-creation rebellion, the doctrine that Satan was created good and fell by his own choice. The Council of Braga in 561 CE made it binding. Anyone who denied that Satan was created good and fell was anathematized. What had been Origen's philosophical interpretation in 230 CE became doctrinal law in 561 CE. 330 years from private reading to institutional mandate. There is a verse in Luke that the church uses, chapter 10, verse 18. The disciples return from a mission. They are excited. They have healed the sick, cast out spirits. They tell Jesus. And Jesus responds, I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. The patristic theologians seized on this verse. Jesus himself described the fall. The rebellion happened before creation. Proof. But read the text carefully. Jesus speaks this in response to the disciples' report. He uses the present tense of observation, not the past tense of historical record. No time frame is given, no location, no context that places this observation before creation. And the phrase like lightning, the Greek word is hos, as like, is a simile, a comparison of speed, not a description of a historical event. 2 verses later, Jesus redirects entirely. Nevertheless, do not rejoice at this that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. The theological weight of the rebel angel cosmology that was later built on verse 18 is not supported by the surrounding text. Jesus makes a brief, unexplained metaphorical statement. He immediately changes the subject. 3 centuries later, Origen made it the keystone of a systematic doctrine. And Revelation chapter 12, the 4th text in the construction, the war in heaven, Michael and the dragon, was written approximately 95 CE during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. A period of active persecution of Christians. Apocalyptic literature written in code for a suffering community. The dragon is Rome. The war is the present moment, not pre-creation. The encouragement is immediate. You are suffering now, but the adversary has already lost. Written as immediate pastoral comfort. Assembled 3 centuries later into a cosmological origin story it was never intended to tell. The story was assembled text by text. None of the authors knew each other. None were writing about the same event. Isaiah wrote a poem for a defeated Babylonian king. Ezekiel wrote a lament for a fallen Tyrian ruler. Luke recorded a metaphor Jesus used in a teaching moment. John of Patmos wrote coded encouragement for Christians hiding from Domitian. And Origen of Alexandria, reading in Alexandria in 230 CE, looked at 4 separate poems in 3 different languages across 700 years of history and said, these are the same event. They were not. But the story he assembled was exactly what a suffering institution needed. A cosmic villain with a biography, a rebellion with a beginning, an enemy with a name, something to fight, something to blame, something that explained why the world had gone wrong without requiring a renegotiation of what God was. Elaine Pagels, professor at Princeton, National Book Award winner, spent years tracing the development of the adversary figure in Jewish and Christian tradition. Her conclusion, published in 1995 in The Origin of Satan, is this: the rebel angel emerged not from ancient cosmology, but from social conflict. The Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, used the adversary figure to identify their human opponents as agents of cosmic darkness. The early Christian communities used it to demonize the synagogue leaders who were expelling them from Jewish institutions. Paul used it to describe opponents within the new churches. In every case, Pagels argues, the adversary is not a theological entity first. He is a political tool, a way of saying, the people opposing us are not just wrong. They're on the wrong side of a cosmic war. The rebel angel story was useful. It explained suffering without blaming God. It unified communities against a common enemy. It gave institutional opposition a supernatural character. And Benítez, who spent 40 years inside the primary texts, inside the canonical and the forbidden, found no support for the rebel angel biography anywhere in the material he examined. His investigators in Caballo de Troya encountered a cosmology where the adversarial force was operational, functional, a principle of opposition, not a person with a history. There was no throne room rebellion, no name before the fall, no war in heaven with a documented beginning. The church needed a story, Benítez wrote, and the story needed a villain with a biography, because a villain with a biography can be fought, a principle cannot. Now let me say the part that is hardest for me to say cleanly, because I want to be precise about what I am claiming and what I am not. I am not claiming evil is not real. I am claiming that the specific story, the name Lucifer, the pre-creation rebellion, the war in heaven, the fall, the biography of the adversary, was constructed between 230 CE and 426 CE from 4 texts that were not written about those events. The construction was not malicious. Origen was not fraudulent. Augustine was not lying. They were brilliant men applying the philosophical tools of their tradition, Greek cosmological frameworks, Platonic categories of light and darkness, to texts that had originally emerged from a very different intellectual world. The problem is that what they built became doctrine, not as, here is our best current understanding, as binding truth, as something you cannot deny without being anathematized. And what was lost in that solidification was the text's own account. Hey Satan, a function, not a name. Isaiah 14, a taunt against a human king. Ezekiel 28, a lament over another human king. Job 1, a divine counsel prosecutor with standing access to God. The original cosmology is stranger than the later one, not more comfortable, stranger, a universe where the adversarial principle is not a rebel, but a role, where evil has no throne room of its own, where the figure called the adversary needs explicit divine permission to act. That is a harder universe to live in than one with a named enemy and a documented rebellion. It gives you less to fight, less to blame, less to organize your fear around. The church gave you the version with the biography, because the biography was useful. What the text gave you was something else. You learned the name before you learned to ask where it came from. Lucifer. Maybe you heard it from a priest. Maybe from a grandmother who said it the way you only say certain words, quietly, with the weight of real danger behind them. Maybe from a teacher at a school like mine, presenting it as settled geography, heaven above, earth in the middle, the rebel's kingdom below. When were you ever invited to ask, where does that name come from? In what Sunday school lesson? In which sermon? In what moment were you given the concordance and asked to trace the word back to its source? Not because the question was forbidden. It was never forbidden. The evidence was always public. Jerome's Vulgate is not a secret document. The documentary hypothesis is not suppressed scholarship. The Dead Sea Scrolls are in published translations at every university library in the country. Nobody hid the concordance. Nobody hid the concordance. You just were never handed it and asked to look. And if you had been, if in some 7th grade classroom in some Catholic school somewhere, a teacher had said, "Here, look up Lucifer. Find the Hebrew, tell me what you see," the lesson would have had to start over. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not a conclusion, not a theological position, just the record. Isaiah 14, verse 12. A political taunt against the king of Babylon, addressed explicitly to a human ruler in verse 4, containing a standard Near Eastern astronomical metaphor that Jerome translated into Latin with a common noun. Ezekiel 28, verses 12 through 17. A lament over the king of Tyre, using the same mythological register that ancient Near Eastern court poetry routinely employed to describe human rulers. Job, chapters 1 and 2. Hey Satan, a title, a function, a member of the divine council with a standing invitation, who operates exclusively within divine authorization, who needs explicit permission for every action he takes. Luke 10 verse 18. A brief unexplained metaphorical statement by Jesus in the middle of a teaching moment, immediately followed by a redirection, with no time frame and no cosmological context. Revelation 12 verses 7 through 9. Apocalyptic encouragement literature written for a community under Roman persecution, using symbolic code that the contemporary audience would have understood as referring to the immediate political situation. 4 texts, none of them written about the same event, none of them written to describe a pre-cosmic rebellion, assembled between 230 and 426 CE by Origen of Alexandria and Augustine of Hippo into a narrative that became binding doctrine by the end of the 6th century. The Church has had all of this for 2,000 years. The scholarship is not new. The verses are in the same Bible. The concordance is on the shelf. The rebel angel is not in the original text. What is in the text is harder to explain and harder to live with. A universe where the adversary is a role, where evil has no biography, where the darkness is not organized by someone who was once beautiful. Just the darkness, older than any name. You decide what to do with this.